Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. I want to do a tag today, a pretty funny one, created by Brian at the channel BellTube called the Nightclub Book Tag. I was tagged by the lovely Pat of Book Chat with Pat. Let's get straight to the prompts. Prompt number 1 is Cocktail Hour. Name a book you think pairs perfectly with your favorite drink. Well, I don't drink them often. I really love the cocktail called French 75. It's essentially champagne spiked with gin, Cointreau or triple sec, and lemon juice. And I believe the drink was originally named after a particular weapon used during World War I. So the book to go with this is The Great Gatsby, which I've been thinking about a lot because my son is a sound engineer, a so-called A1 for a musical version of Gatsby currently coming to the end of its run in Boston. The music is by Florence and the Machine, and this version is often considered the, quote, dark Gatsby when compared to the happy version that has recently been on Broadway. I think it's fascinating to have two shows happening at once, especially when they have apparently such a marked difference in tone. The second prompt, Neon Lights. Name a book with a cover that immediately grabbed your attention, like bright lights in a club. I think I'll choose the Penguin edition of Master and Margarita, translated by Pavir and Volkonsky, with its very stylish art. The cat on the top left and a woman's face on the bottom. I rarely make it a point to buy particular editions of books just for their cover art, but this one definitely caught my eye. Prompt number 3, The Bouncer. What book did you have to put down because it just wasn't letting you in? Well, maybe War and Peace. It isn't exactly that the book didn't let me in, I don't think. I have lots of excuses for why I abandoned Tolstoy. I do think one of the reasons was because I had heard that it was the most amazing book ever, and I really didn't feel that way, at least in large swaths that seemed to be the literary equivalent of a soap opera. In other words, it sometimes felt like it was one overly dramatic scenario after another. Of course, I'm afraid the way I was trying to read the book might have cast a spotlight on that very issue. I was reading just a short section each week and talking about each section in gory detail on my channel. And that dragging out of a story, and also feeling like I was supposed to come up with something clever to say about each part, definitely made for a less than ideal reading experience of that book. But fundamentally, War and Peace just didn't blow me away on this first attempt, possibly because I was expecting it to be utterly transcendent. I promise I will go back to it at some point. The fourth prompt, DJ's Choice. What book would you recommend as the perfect read for someone new to the fantasy genre? I don't think I've read an actual fantasy book. I thought about trying The Priory of the Orange Tree, which people sometimes recommend to feminists who want to give fantasy a try. I read the first chapter or two and didn't fall in love with the prose, so I decided that perhaps I should use the time to read one of the many books on the shelves that I can't believe I haven't read yet. Give me your recommendations for the right fantasy to start with. Prompt 5, Disco Ball. Name a book that made you feel like you were part of a vibrant, glittering world. I'm going to name a new book that I still owe you a discussion of. The glittering world is kind of, subtle here compared to disco, I guess. The book is called Natural Magic, written by the scholar Renee Berglund, about the way Emily Dickinson and Charles Darwin saw the natural world in somewhat similar ways, despite the fact that they were raised in different hemispheres and were different sexes, and perhaps even more importantly, had vocations which we often think of as diametrically opposed, poet and scientist. I thought it was very creatively conceived and beautifully written. The sixth prompt, Dance Floor Diva. What book had you dancing with excitement from the first page to the last? Dancing might not be the right word, but I was definitely excited by Greg Iles' book, The Quiet Game, I wanted to read the first book in his Pen Cage thriller series before I read his big new one, Southern Man, which I first heard about on Steve Donahue's channel. The Quiet Game has some quiet moments that talk about family relationships and grief, and others that talk about the complications of romantic relationships. Those both kept me really connected. And the thrilling adventures kept me on my toes for the whole book. I've heard that Southern Man is even better, not succumbing to the stereotypes that Isles sort of occasionally relies on in this first Pen Cage book of his, which he wrote decades ago. Prompt 7, guest list. Which author would you invite to an exclusive book-themed party, and why? I would love to meet George Eliot. She's nerdy and quiet, so we could find a corner at the party and I could ask her lots and lots of questions. I'd also love to invite Southern writer Eudora Welty. I can imagine that Eliot and Welty might actually get along with each other. The 8th prompt, VIP entrance. Which book did you feel privileged to read before it became more widely popular? Percival Everett's novel James came out in March of 2024, I think, and I was thrilled to read it maybe in the fall of 2023. Amazing book. I promise to talk about it in more detail on my channel sometime. I can't believe I haven't done so yet. Prompt 9, dance battle. Which two characters from different books would you love to see face off in a dance battle? How about Trollope's Obadiah Slope and Mr. Collins from Austen's Pride and Prejudice? They could both slither around the dance floor. The 10th prompt, midnight read. What's a book you couldn't put down and ended up reading all night? I don't know that I've ever read all night. I have written all night, but I do like to read books in one gulp when I can. I read Tessa of the D'Urbervilles that way during the day, and then all of the Maine Hardy novels, all in 1 week, back to back, one per day. Actually, the first time I realized that one sitting reading isn't how most people read was back in college when I stumbled across a copy of William Faulkner's Light in August and read it in one afternoon and evening. When an English major friend asked me what I was thinking of it, and I said I'd finished it, he was shocked. His surprise surprised me. Perhaps this is weird, but I am a much slower reader now than I was back then. Prompt number 11, after party. What book left you with a hangover, unable to start a new read immediately after finishing it? I'm not sure I ever had a book hangover. How about this one? My son handed me a copy of Cyrano de Bergerac, as translated by Anthony Burgess. I think he's read it dozens and dozens of times, and I adored it too. And as soon as I turned the last page, I immediately started it anew. And after the double reading, I could go on to a different book. The 12th prompt, late night conversations. Which book left you thinking deeply or wanting to discuss it with others late into the night? For me, that would be a book written by the daughter of the great critic Clifton Fadiman, Anne Fadiman, in her book The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down. It's a beautifully written and very moving personal narrative about what I guess is medical sociology, about a young girl with epilepsy whose Hmong community sees her epilepsy in a different way from the Western medical community. Fadiman is not trying to persuade readers that the Hmong view is equally efficacious medically or anything like that. What she examines is how people with such radically different understandings can talk to each other with respect and actually communicate across whatever divide they might face. Anyway, a day or two after I read Fadiman's book, I started talking to a young medical student who had been an anthropology major in college, and he had just read it too. We already knew each other, but not well, and we didn't know we had both just read this book. And we both really needed to talk to someone else about it who had also read it. So we did. And eventually, reader, I married him. This is a great tag, and I encourage all you booktubers out there to make your own version. I'm not going to tag anyone this week because during my week in Boston and in preparation for another big commitment next week, I haven't kept up on BookTube enough to know who has already done the tag. But please, if you're interested, consider yourself tagged and feel free to say I tagged you, because I have. Thank you so much for joining me. See you soon here on Hannah's Books.